young people as clones of our sense of reality we want them to have. Be controllable. And we'll call it education. And it means that we'll take children from their parents at a very early age and we'll keep them there about 5 days a week at least, all the way through their formative years, and we'll pound them every day with how virtual reality is.
Burn your history books, kill your TVs. What you're being fed is disease. You're being led to dis-ease. Wake up your consciousness, live free.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Free Your Mind podcast. This is episode number 67, and on this episode we have special guest with us, Mark Devlin. Devlin is a UK-based club and radio DJ and music journalist, specializing in black dance music in its many forms. In more recent years, he has begun speaking on radio at events of dark forces that have been manipulating and controlling mainstream music industry for decades, and how this ties into much larger picture of what is really going on in the world. Welcome to the show, Mark. Great to have you.
Hey, Bill. What's happening, brother?
Not much, man. So Mark's in the UK. I'm in Seattle, and Mark just got off a nice day of working, and is gracious enough to join us. So thank you, man, for taking the time out of your day to speak with us. And let's get into it, dude. I want to talk about the music industry and how that influences people's psyche overall, as far as a collective consciousness, and also what's really going on in there. How is this used as a tool to manipulate?
Well, I mean, where do you start with all of that? It's just such a massive subject. As I discovered when I started writing the book, which is almost finished. My book, Musical Truth, is going to be out in a few months. I'm looking to get that on the streets in the first quarter of 2016. And I've spent the last year writing it, just over a year, and it's based on about 4 years' worth of research. And it's pretty deep. It's going to be about 200,000 words.
Wow. So
it's not going to be a pamphlet, it's going to be more of a doorstop. And it incorporates all the stuff that I've come to understand about what goes on behind the scenes in the corporate music industry. I'm talking, the mainstream industry where all the A-list household names reside. Not every single level of the industry, just where all the superstars and the celebs are made. That's where all the kind of dark stuff happens. And we go from nice, family-friendly, fluffy subjects like demonic possession and ritual sacrifice, every subject should have one. And we get into mind-controlled artists, the world of trauma-based mind control, how that plays out in the music industry and also in Hollywood and the entertainment industry generally. I've got a section on transhumanism. I've got a couple of sections going way back to the early days of the industry, when popular music was being formed in the 1950s and 1960s, both in the UK and US, just looking at the suggestion that the entire entertainment business, or the entire music industry, was actually set up for mass mind control and social conditioning purposes. It wasn't just for entertainment. It wasn't just this innocent thing that grew up organically. There was evidence of the hidden hand way back in the early days. So I've got 2 chapters on the Beatles. One of them is all about this idea that Paul McCartney was replaced in 1966. That was supposed to be a section of a chapter. I'd intended to write a couple of hundred words about it, but it just kept going and kept going and kept going, and I went down so many rabbit holes, I didn't stand any chance of going back the way I came. And before I knew it, I'd written 13,000 words on the subject, because to do it proper justice, that's the kind of length you're looking at. There's a section on the Rolling Stones. There's a whole section on the hippie counterculture era of the late 60s, very much picking up on the work of Dave McGowan, talking about the artists that came out of Laurel Canyon that formed that whole anti-establishment hippie era, and the suggestion that the whole thing was kind of controlled by military intelligence services when you look into the family backgrounds of all these key artists. What else? A section entitled The Systematic Degeneration of Hip-Hop Culture, which is a subject very close to my heart. Having been a hip-hop DJ for the past 25 years, that's pretty much my specialist subject. And I've looked at the ways in which this once beautiful, meaningful, and even spiritual art form was taken by the corporations when they could see the power and the influence that it was having on large numbers of people. And it was just corrupted and degraded and debased into the toxic sort of quagmire of filth and depravity that it is now. The transhumanist agenda, did I mention that? How that plays out in the music industry?
Well, you touched on it. You didn't mention it. And what I want. It is a huge package to start getting into this music industry. But what I want people to realize is that, and you said that this all started back in the 50s. Is that when you see the pattern of influence of making this a manipulation model?
Well, pretty much, yeah. With the arrival of Elvis Presley and other artists of that ilk over in the UK, we had Cliff Richard, who was billed as the UK's answer to Elvis. And when he first came out at the end of the 50s, he was making rock and roll tunes and, being marketed in that way. There's lots to say about Cliff Richard, particularly in recent months. He's made the headlines over here in the UK in a fairly unsavoury way. I suppose you have to be a bit careful about what you do say because nothing has been proved, so to speak, but there's lots of kind of suspicions and allegations about Cliff Richard's true nature, and he wouldn't be alone in that. He's a key player in the industry. He's enjoyed fame, fortune and success for decades. He's also a sir, which is always a bit of a clue, a bit of a red flag. Anyone who's a sir or a lord has done something to earn that title. But in the States, Elvis Presley, with so many artists, when you delve into their backgrounds and their family connections, you find evidence of links to the military intelligence services and various government departments. There are suggestions that Elvis was working for the CIA and the DEA and various other alphabet agencies. So straight away, you start to get bogged down in all this background detail. There's also suggestions that Elvis faked his death in 1977 and all was not as it seemed there. And then you've got acts like Bill Haley and the Comets, I guess, who came through in 1955 with Rock Around the Clock. And an interesting thing about that is it's a very early example of the powers that control the music industry taking a particular genre that had its roots in black culture, because rock and roll kind of built on rhythm and blues, those older forms of black music that came right out of... when you take it right back, it came out of the sort of African traditions that were brought over to the US in the early days of slavery. And you can follow the family tree with all these different types of music, and it kind of morphed into the blues and jazz. And
right, around the time of Prohibition, it had a little evolution around that time with the jazz clubs and speakeasies and yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely.
And when you look at pretty much all popular music, if you do the family tree and if you trace the roots back far enough, it all has its roots in black culture and black civilizations, and it all goes back to Africa. And this is something that I get into in that chapter on why they've decided to spend so much time debasing hip-hop culture. But what's interesting about Bill Haley and the Comets is it's like an early example of a particular form of music that was originally put out there by black musicians, and it was given a kind of family-friendly, mainstream-friendly white face. So you had this middle-aged guy, Bill Haley, who had already tried to make a go of things in different genres. He tried his hand at country and jazz and gospel, and he wasn't really successful. And then he took this kind of black rhythm and blues-based music that was becoming rock and roll, and became very successful at marketing that and making it palatable to the general US public. And, they just kind of put a white face on it and made it acceptable to the public at large. And they did pretty much the same thing with Elvis Presley. And it's interesting when you look at all these different genres. One of the biggest reggae groups in the UK over the decades has been UB40. And although it's got black members, you've got a couple of white brothers who were the frontmen of the group. And then you have Madness, who took ska music, which came out of Jamaica, and they're an all-white band, and they just made that music, very, very popular, kind of watered it down a bit, I guess, for the pop market, but they were the sort of public acceptable face of ska music. Same thing with Level 42 and funk, jazz fusion funk music that was around. I just find it very interesting that they take these black forms of music and give it to white groups to make it appealing to the public at large. I'm probably going off at a tangent here, but yeah, we were talking about the early days of the industry.
Right, but I think it's all relevant, and, just go on your tangent, because this is something that, you're versed in, and a lot of people are just hearing about it now. And
it's all connected. It really is all connected at the end of the day. You can join all these dots, to coin a phrase, and, everything is cyclical, and there are synchronistic connections in all of this stuff, and it's just fascinating to me.
Right, and those need to be paid attention to. And basically what I was saying is around the 50s, World War II was over, and they had this large military machine that they built, and they also built a large propaganda machine, and they turned this around onto the American people with taking and transmuting a lot of these things that were used in the war effort to get people to kind of, I don't know, what is the overall goal of this? Is just to get people to not realize their power as an individual? Is it to keep them in fear, to keep them separate? What is the...
Well, I think there's always more than one reason why these elite controllers, call them what you will, why they do any of their plans, their skullduggery, why they carry any of these things out. There's usually a principal reason, and there's a whole bunch of subsidiary reasons that also serve the cause. So when it comes to why they invented the music industry as such and put it out there, I think one of the reasons is it's just a way of keeping people distracted from things that really matter in life. We've heard the phrase bread and circuses, which goes right back to the Roman era. And what it means is if you can keep the public basically satisfied in two ways, that is fed, so they get their daily food, and you keep them entertained and distracted and away from asking too many questions about important things that really matter in life, then you've got them locked down. And that's what it's all about. And I think if you removed those two things from the general public, those are probably the only two things that would ever cause massive riots and cause people to get really upset and really take to the streets and really cause a fuss. You take away their food so they can't eat, and you take away their entertainment. So you shut down the TV and you take away the ball games and you take away all the music. That's when people would get really upset. So it's all about bread and circuses. So one of the main reasons is, I think, just to keep people distracted, because people get very obsessive about music. Everyone likes music of one kind or another, whether it's opera, classical, country music, hip-hop, dance music, rock, whatever it is. Everyone is into some kind of music. And people do get obsessive about it. I know this because I've been there myself. I've been a quite enthusiastic collector of music, of vinyl, and a bit of a train spotter in terms of finding out stuff about all these artists and record labels, and so many people do, and you can spend a lot of time on that, and all the time that you spend on it is keeping you away from perhaps noticing things that are going on and paying attention to things that you should be paying attention to. So there's that aspect to it. In recent years, I think the music game has been used very much for mind control purposes, implanting certain belief systems and certain perceptions in the minds of the general public. And there's been quite an insidious agenda going on in terms of what's going into the music, the lyrical content, and the sort of attitudes towards things that's sowing in the public's consciousness, and also the methods of production and the way records actually sound has been changing as well. And there's stuff going on there at an unseen level on a scientific kind of basis that is affecting people's consciousness as well without them realizing it, and is affecting their subconscious thoughts. So that's quite a malevolent agenda that's been rolled out.
Absolutely.
And I think all these things are quite relevant in terms of how they've used the music industry through the decades. It's been a very useful tool for them, which is why they plow so much money into it and why it's such a massive industry now. And it sits side by side with Hollywood movies, television, the television industry, and all the other stuff that's being done to us. You know, it is all connected because ultimately the controllers of all these different walks of life are the same individuals when you follow it far enough up the power pyramid, so to speak. It's the same old scenario. You've got a few thousand people, or tens of thousands at most, controlling 7 billion. Mm-hmm. It's completely ridiculous when you really break it down.
You know, and people that I speak with, they're like, man, this is just impossible. And I break it down, and there's a book out there called Superclass that I recommend you checking out. And it's basically, it breaks it down how this is possible, how titans of industry use leverage points, and they recognize it's crazy. And I got to take my hats off to them, the way that these guys think, because it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, because it's like 5 or 6 dimensions of thought, and they're like they act on this Hegelian dialectic, you know, where they're waiting for a reaction, and then they have the solution already planned. And you know, this is just another platform of discourse and disconnect, I believe, from taking people's power from seeing their power as individuals to unite and kind of relying on this as their opinion of the world. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah, and also they plan decades or even centuries in advance.
Yes.
Like you say, these people are so committed to their goals and their agendas that, in a sense, you do have to have a grudging kind of admiration for them, because, you know, the rest of us just do not have that will and that tenacity about us, which is why we've been so easily controlled. You know, these individuals put plans in place for events to happen at a time when they know they cannot possibly still be alive. You know, their descendants will be, but they themselves will not see the long-term outcome of the things that they put into place. That is dedication. You know, the rest of us lack that unity amongst ourselves and that commitment to anything, really, which makes us ripe for manipulation.
That's right.
And that's what's happened. And all the stuff that's going on in the world, all the suffering, all the injustice, all the chaos, all this just human suffering is only possible because we, in the collective sense, in the macrocosmic sense, allow it to happen, because we give our tacit approval and our consent to it. If we were all on the same page and we were all united in our thoughts, actions and emotions, and we all willed the same kind of outcome, one which is a better deal for all of humanity, then all of this chaos and madness and violence that we have around us would come to an end. That's what people have to understand, and until we can achieve that, then not a whole lot is going to change. I think slowly people are coming to this understanding. It's an understanding I've come to in fairly recent times, but when you do, you know, the solution is so clear. We just have to want it enough. There's enough of us to affect real change. How much do we want it? And how much are we committed to breaking out of this mind-controlled trance that we've been put in through the ages? You know, it is possible to understand the methods that they work by. It is possible to understand what's been done to us with some vigilant research. The opportunities to discover this are available to anyone that has access to the internet. That's what it's there for. That is why we are seeing so many people come into these great truths in these times. It is available and it is possible. So is the will there? That is the question.
That's right. And never in a million years would I think that I would have been hosting a podcast that's we would be talking about
me neither.
You know, but it's just something that is it's an intuitive nudge that I have to, you know, get this information out, to let people have access to this, and to not just believe me and Mark here, to do your own research. And the book that I was speaking about, it was Superclass, The Global Power Elite and the World They Are Making, and it's by David Rothkopf. and definitely check it out. And I also want to touch back too on, being aware and becoming aware. And I'm sure that some of these artists kind of get behind the scenes and they see what's happening, but literally there is an initiation process to get up to these upper levels, and it involves almost like there is a saying that's selling your soul. And would you speak on that for a bit, Mark?
People assume that the phrase selling your soul for fame and fortune is some kind of myth or, just some cute, pithy thing to say. But I would suggest that there is some very real truth to it. The idea goes back centuries. There's this German legend of Faust, which has been a play, and it's been a book. And the idea is that you have this character who is very successful in life in terms of having achieved great riches, but he wants to discover more about the mysteries of the universe, and he also wants to indulge in some of the kind of earthly pleasures that he's not been privy to before. And so he strikes up this deal with the devil and enters this pact whereby he sells his mortal soul in order to be enlightened with this knowledge and these experiences. That plays out in the music industry in this kind of mythical, supposedly, although maybe it isn't, story of the blues musician Robert Johnson, who is said to have sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads in exchange for great musical talent. And so that's where he learned to become such a successful blues musician. Very strange story about Robert Johnson. He died at the age of 27 in very strange and disturbing circumstances. He was an early member of what's come to be known as the 27 Club. But that story first kind of popularized this idea of selling your soul for fame and fortune. And when you speak to insiders and whistleblowers who have worked in the music industry and also Hollywood movies, you come to realize that, this is very much the case, and there is a lot of truth to it. When you are elevated to the upper levels of the industry, they call it the $20 million club to start with. That's when you're on your way to the VIP club, the proper A-list, and then you have the $50 million club, and then the $100 million club when you're right up there with all the high flyers and the big names. This comes with a price, and you are required to do some things in exchange for the fame and fortune that they can grant you. Because those that control these industries, they can make anything happen. They've got the connections. They are definitely in a position to put you right up there where you want to be, if you want it enough. And if you are prepared to degrade and debase your morals enough. And this is where, the selling your soul comes in, because you are basically trading in your humanity and doing some very low and base things. And so they have these initiation rituals where you attend these ritual sex magic themed orgies where anything goes. If anybody's seen the movie Eyes Wide Shut, the Stanley Kubrick film, you've got the sort of elite orgy scenes there up in that mansion. And if anything, from what you hear, that stuff is mild. That stuff looks like a Girl Guides picnic in terms of the stuff that you are involved with when you get moved up through the industry. There have been insiders that have talked about this. Dave Chappelle, the comedian, and also Cat Williams have had a whole lot to say about it. You can find their videos on YouTube where they talk about the nature of some of these parties. Professor Griff out of Public Enemy has talked about it as well, as have a few other insiders. So, yeah, it's ritual sex magic. It's homosexuality, basically, it's based in homosexual acts, but it also involves paedophilia, we hear, bestiality, just all kinds of degraded and depraved sexual acts. And the reason they do it is partly to just completely lock you down into base consciousness, to completely get at those lower chakras and just bring your energy levels and your spirituality right down to earth, to the very lowest condition it can be in for you to continue to function as a human or, vaguely human.
Well,
and they also... they also, we hear, videotape this
there we
stuff.
go. I was just going to say, I would assume that they would be videotaping all this too.
Yes, this is what they do. They tape it so that if you should ever decide to go off script, or if you should ever decide to try and speak out about all this stuff when you decide it's not for you, they've got the goods on you and they can blackmail you, and they've got footage that you really would not want your mum and your grandmother seeing. And we hear that this is the sort of thing that goes on in the world of politics as well. They do it with politicians all the time, and business leaders. They're all involved in these elite sex parties. Don't think that it's any different in those walks of life. It would be the same in banking, the financial sector, all these big corporations. They are all connected. They all attend these same parties, and all these levels of fame, success, and great riches and fortune, so-called, all come with this heavy price to pay. It's just not worth it, as I'm sure many of these artists discover when it's too late. Because once you cross that line and once you sign that contract, and the idea of signing a contract in your own blood might not be as far-fetched as it at first sounds. Once you cross that line, you're doing what they say now. You can no longer say, no, your arse is owned, literally. You are their property and you're dancing to their tune. So you might have the mansion and the yacht and all these homes and all the jewelry, and you attend all these swish celeb parties, but you no longer have your humanity, and you can no longer live the kind of life that you did before. There's no going back to that. That's why so many of these artists go on for decades, decade after decade. Same with Hollywood actors. You enter this scene, they elevate you to a certain level, but you're in service to them from that point on for the rest of your days. There is no way out. The best thing that can ever happen to you is not making it big in the music industry.
Wow. And it's just crazy. Wasn't there a guy that they just released pictures of him sleeping with a dead pig or something?
Oh, was this Cameron?
Yeah, David Cameron. So that
British Prime Minister David Cameron. Isn't it incredible? This guy is a psychopathic war criminal. He's been protecting paedophiles in Parliament. He's been protecting them from being named. But the British public doesn't seem to mind about that. They don't seem to mind about the fact that he's presiding over a country that is poisoning its people from the skies on a daily basis, that is dropping bombs on innocent civilians all around the world in the name of protecting them, and is sending people out to die in these foreign wars of occupation. They seem to be just fine with that. But the minute a story breaks about him attending one of these elite parties, probably of the nature that I've just outlined, this was supposed to be in the days when he was a Bullingdon boy, before he went to Eton, where he would have been completely indoctrinated into the system, the establishment. The place that a lot of them go before that is Oxford University or Cambridge. And at Oxford University, they have this club called the Bullingdon Club, which is where all the posh little boys with rich daddies go. And one of the favourite things they do is they go out to restaurants and they have these wild parties and they trash the restaurant. And then daddy comes along and just writes them a cheque to pay for all the damage. And that's the way that these people are raised. And they become leaders, business leaders and politicians that people actually look up to. But there was reports of this one particular party back in his Bullingdon boy days where David Cameron is said to have stuck his tackle in the mouth of a dead pig. I'd quite like to know what a dead pig was doing there in the first place. Nobody seems to be answering this question. Maybe they were having a hog roast or something, but what was a dead pig doing in the bloody party in the first place? But anyway, he's supposed to have, whacked his tackle out into this pig's mouth, and everyone's losing their minds over it. Yeah. And there we have a little glimpse into the sort of stuff that goes on at these parties.
That's just how they do things.
And people look up to these individuals. It's just absolutely incredible. The mind control runs very deep.
Well, and then they see these people looking up to them, and it just reinforces their mindset, and propagates this model of slavery and intimidation, and I can do whatever I want, us versus them type of stuff,
Yeah, and we've got the monarchy still here in the UK. You know, how it survived is beyond me. And it's just so depressing when you see the Queen out on some public engagement with her gold carriage, which is probably worth a few million. Can you imagine how many people that could house and feed, and how many social problems that would solve?
Yes.
And then she makes speeches about austerity while she's sat on a throne with a bloody crown worth several million on her head. So more of the same. But she'll go out on one of these public engagements and you see hundreds of thousands of mind-controlled zombies going out and waving their shitty little plastic flags with the Union Jack on. And they'll camp out all day. You know, they'll probably get there at about 4 o'clock in the morning just so they can get a good position and they can catch perhaps a 10-second glimpse of her as she rides past. And they're all shouting, "Oh, Your Majesty," and waving and trying to get noticed. And, you know, here we have a figurehead for empire and colonialism, which over the centuries has been responsible for death and suffering and, you know, human tragedy and injustice and raping and pillaging of nations, and yet people will stand and cheer the figurehead for all of this. And she appears on TV every Christmas with a scripted message that's written for her, and people tune in their millions to watch it. And, you know, people still support this system of subjugation and slavery. It's just incredible to me.
Well, could you imagine putting yourself on the other side and seeing all these people just worship you day after day after day? And, you know, the global elite refer to us as...
What a bloody nightmare.
Well, I know, for us it would be, but I mean, imagine being born into that and thinking about these masses, and that's what the people call us. You said zombies, and they call us the dead or the unbegun.
Yep.
And, you know, and it makes sense when you start to look at it, because people, you know, and it seems like almost 90% of people out there would do almost anything but think. And it's so frustrating.
And take responsibility. That's what it is.
And take responsibility. What is responsibility? Your ability to respond. And and it comes with understanding, to stand under something, to have such a great knowledge of it that you stand under it. And that comes with conversation. And as people that are conscious and with compassion and empathy, there's no subject that we shouldn't be able to unpack without killing each other and without even hurting each other, you know, and to look at, objectively at different models and different forms of manipulation, like music and like TV and all this stuff is, you know, it takes time, and you have to look at it from a perspective of, you know what, this is possible, because when you look at what happens to the human mind when it's introduced to like a melody or a tempo. Do you talk about that in your book, Mark? How we all kind of become one, we go into one kind of wavelength.
Yeah, I'm reserving some of that for a second book, believe it or not, because I came to realise when I was about two-thirds of the way through writing this book that I couldn't possibly get all the information in this volume that I wanted to without it taking another 2 or 3 years for the book to come out. And I really want to get the book out as soon as possible now, because I think the information in it is very much of the moment and is very much going to speak to people right now. So it's kind of crucial to get this information out in these times. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm pushing into a volume 2, and that concerns much of the information regarding sound frequencies and what actually goes into the makeup of a sound recording, the components of it from a scientific point of view. I need to do some more research into it, but it does concern sound frequencies and methods of mastering. So a lot of that will be going into Volume 2. But yeah, just picking up on what you were saying there, it might seem unfair to some to hear the blame for all the problems that humanity is facing and has been for millennia at the door of the general public, us, because we understand what's being done to us when you get into the research. We understand the ways in which we're being manipulated by this tiny few. And you might think that all the blame for the problems of this world and all the chaos and injustice that we're experiencing should be laid firmly at their door, because they're the ones that are instigating it. But as you delve deeper into spiritual truths, because there is absolute truth which can be known, whether people understand that or not, or choose to believe it or not, there are truths which we can know if we take the care to go and research them. And when you get into all of that, you realize that the responsibility does really lie with us, both on an individual basis and on a collective basis. And the only reason these few individuals have been able to control and manipulate humanity for so long is because we have allowed it, because we've not voiced our objection to it, and we've not withdrawn our consent through our free will consciousness. That is really what it boils down to. And that is the kind of responsibility that we're talking about, that people need to take on an individual and a collective basis. And because people are not taking that responsibility, the problems continue and they escalate. People really need to come to an understanding of all of this. And again, going back to what we were touching on earlier, there is no excuse anymore for people, certainly in your country and mine and many others, to say, I don't know what's going on. If you don't know, it's because you've made a conscious decision not to know. All the information that you need is out there on the internet. There are so many great researchers, authors, filmmakers, scholars, YouTube video makers, bloggers, writers, putting this information out there for anyone that cares to take the time and trouble to look at it. And let's face it, everyone in these times now knows some crazy conspiracy theorist. You know, everyone knows that guy or that girl at work that goes on about this stuff, that talks about 9/11 and chemtrails and all this stuff that's going on. Everyone's got a nutty uncle or, you know, a cousin that talks about this stuff. So if people are choosing not to listen to these people and the information they put out, and if they're choosing not to go and do research of their own, then they are making a free will choice to remain ignorant. You know, there is nescience, as I'm sure many people understand, which is not knowing something because you had no realistic ability to know. You could not reasonably be expected to understand something. You didn't have access to the information. So we could say somebody living in a remote tribe out in the jungle of South America or Papua New Guinea or something, you know, if these teachings are not part of the culture that you're born into, you don't have access to the internet, you don't have access to libraries and books and all the rest of it, so you could not reasonably be expected to understand these truths. But in the UK, the US, and so many other countries, we have the internet, we have books, we have other people that are talking about this stuff, that have done the research, and people are choosing to willfully ignore this. And so the problems continue. And that's the way it has to be on a collective basis. Large numbers of people coming to understand these truths. This is one of the things I'm trying to communicate with the book. The book is, on the surface, and for the most part, all about the various manipulations that are done through the music industry. And it includes many names that people are going to recognize. It talks about songs. It talks about points in history. But the message I'm trying to get across, ultimately, is that it all boils down to understanding truth, understanding morality, understanding how natural law works, understanding how consequentialism works, understanding how the universe dishes out consequences for us in terms of our experiences and in terms of situations which physically manifest based on the free will conscious choices that we choose on a collective basis. And the book is, you know, intended to be a vehicle to impart that information to people. The last couple of chapters are all about this. So having laid out all the manipulations of the music business, the last couple of chapters are trying to get people to come to an understanding of these great truths and apply it in their lives. Because we all have to live in this apparent 3D physical reality. We all have to undergo these experiences collectively. And those of us that have taken some personal responsibility to change things and apply truth to our lives are lumped in with, you know, the 95+%, whatever the statistic is, that have not been. And unfortunately, you know, we all have to undergo this collective experience. So it's in everybody's interests to wake up to these truths and understand what's being done to us while we still have an opportunity to do it, before the boot gets fully stamped down and the doors to the prison get slammed shut and locked, and it's too late for all of us. You know, it's pretty crucial times. It's a message that I'm just trying to get across, and I feel I can do that as someone that talks about the music industry, as a DJ who has been active in it. As I said, everyone likes music, and everyone's attention seems to be piqued by when you start talking about Jay-Z and Beyoncé and Elvis Presley and the Beatles and Led Zeppelin. You know, you can see people start to sit up and take notice. Oh, what's this? Yeah. I'm interested in this. So it is a great way of getting these truths across. Well,
people tend to identify with them because of the music goes right to your heart space. You know, that's definitely a feminine aspect of creativity. Yep. And so people will connect, you know, with their heart with these artists, and I do too, man. I love funk. I love seeing funk live and seeing or feeling the horns, you know, just vibrate through your body and just boom, and then, you know, and I love seeing a good DJ that can get a whole crowd just dancing together. Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing. It just makes you. You know, it makes you feel, and when you're feeling, you're definitely alive. But a lot of times, those feelings can be easily manipulated because you can't think with those emotions. And so, it is important that you do your due diligence on researching this stuff. And guess what? A lot of this isn't going to make you feel good, because a lot of this is dark shit, like Mark was saying. You know, it's satanic, and that's another form of influence that's keeping you from this, is that new age bullshit of, if it doesn't feel good, then ignore it. No. Don't be ignorant. You know, Look at it. I'm not saying obsess about it, but shine a light and know that it's there, know that it's happening. And also, you know what? Be your own artist. You know, I don't work for a radio station. I don't have to have anybody's permission to produce this. I'm going to be editing it out a little bit and then putting it up right away after we're done talking without anybody's permission. And so, you know what? You can make your own music, and we can make our own media. We do not have to rely on these assholes that you know, the powers that should not be. And you know what? I know that they recognize talent, and they have talent, and they use that talent to leverage their position. But there's a lot of talent in this world, and just waiting to be uncovered. There's a lot of diamonds out there in the rough, man.
Well, yeah, a few things about that. As has been said a number of times, it's not necessarily the case that Beyoncé and Rihanna and Katy Perry and Lady Gaga are the best singers out there. They're not the best singers in the world. They're just the ones that were chosen. They're the ones that were elevated into those positions because they're the ones that were either prepared to degrade their morals in exchange for fame and fortune, or they were mind controlled into it, and they came up through certain family connections, certain bloodlines, and they were effectively bred for the role. You know, that's a whole nother subject in itself when you get into the world of mind control and satanic ritual abuse. That's stuff that Jay Parker talks about and many others. But either way, the positions are maintained, and they just slot these characters into them. So there's always going to be a position for the number one rapper in the world. And for the past 20 years or so, it just happens to have been occupied by Jay-Z. He's the one that they chose to slot into that role. But nobody need think that if something happened to Jay-Z tomorrow, or he was removed from the scene, there wouldn't be somebody else that they would just slot into that role. It's not about Jay-Z. It's not the fact that he's in that position. It's just the fact that a vacancy always exists for that position. So you have Beyoncé, most high-profile R&B artist, Jay-Z, most high-profile rapper. They just happen to have been paired off in an industry arranged marriage, because that's another thing. When you get up in the upper ranks of the entertainment industry, they want you to have industry friends. It's like a cult. They cut you off from regular everyday life. That's why these people don't have regular boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives. They always marry other celebrities or are seen out with other celebrities. They want to keep it in the family, keep it in the club. They don't want them talking to regular, normal, everyday people. They often cut you off from your family as well, so you don't see your mum and your brother and sister and your cousins anymore. So that's what they do. And there's always going to be somebody else to take these positions. And I think it's a fairly safe bet to assume that the controllers have nothing but contempt for many of these A-list artists, many of these individuals that they put up there in these positions, because they were prepared to do whatever it took. They were prepared to go to these sick, twisted parties and just engage in all manner of perverted activity because they wanted the fame and fortune so badly. How can you respect someone that is prepared to degrade their humanity like that?
Sell their soul, man.
Yeah. And it's not the case that I'm not trying to tell anyone that they shouldn't pursue their dream to become a musician or an actor or a television presenter or anything like that. All I'm saying is to be wary of when you reach that certain plateau and you get invited or chosen to go up the final few rungs of the ladder to the very top. You know, there comes a point where you may get offered that when you've already tasted a certain level of success or where you've shown yourself to have the kind of skills that they are looking to exploit. But below that, in the kind of entry levels to the industry, there's a great deal of talent and there's a great deal of artists that maintain their integrity and that are expressing themselves creatively. And I would not ever suggest that people shouldn't try and make a go of things as a music maker. You know, the world needs music. We need it, man. It's got to be put out there, and we need new names coming forward all the times, making music and being in all these other forms of the creative arts. So people shouldn't get it twisted and think I'm saying the entire industry is evil and you should stay away from it. I'm just saying be wary of reaching those upper levels.
That's very well said. And also look at our buddy Mark Passio, man. What's he doing? He's making music now.
Making music, yeah.
That's right. And I can't wait to hear what he has made, you know, and it's just, that's how we support each other. We all have these intrinsic desires, just like Mark make music, you know, and we were talking about that before we started the show on how now he's much more selective on what gigs he chooses. And, you know, I went to Burning Man, and I know, and guess what? I went to Burning Man this year with kind of eyes open because I'm aware of it being kind of infiltrated by intelligence and ABC companies. And
oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, man. And I just posted up a link on my Facebook wall where, yeah, they confirmed it, that they're looking for potential terrorists, you know. Yeah. But it's also, do they have all
the dark occult symbolism there? Do you see all these familiar symbols at Burning Man?
Yeah. I think that, you know, and that's the thing, man, is that the first time I went to Burning Man, I was expecting, you know, conscious conversations, and it's not at all like that. You know, it's about rebellion and people getting fucked up and taking a bunch of drugs and you know, listening to some great music, and I see that
modern day Woodstock,
kinda. I mean, it is, and I see value in the festival scene, you know, but I also see it being co-opted. I mean, Google was there with their virtual reality tent that you can go in and watch this stuff, and you know, there's just different things that it's just changing as it grows in popularity. You see this evolving. And especially we were talking about that too, is once people start getting higher and higher, you know, more money, and we see a difference in behavior and wants and desires as well. And it's just interesting to watch, and you know, but make yourself aware of this technique of manipulation, because once you're aware of it, it doesn't have the power that it needs to.
Exactly.
And that's, you know, that's the key of shining the light on this stuff, is it takes its power away, and it almost becomes comical.
That's something I always finish my public talks with, because I always try and finish on a positive note. And I point out the fact that once you've had all these techniques and methods of manipulation explained to you, they're not going to work the same way anymore, because it's all targeted at the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind absorbs millions of pieces of information a second, and it just filters out a few pieces of information which go into the conscious mind. They cross that threshold into the conscious mind, the place where logical thought resides, and all the rest of it just stays locked away in the subconscious mind. And it can come out in our behaviors. We don't understand how it's controlling us, but we can be very much influenced by stuff that we've absorbed at a subconscious level, and it comes out in dreams as well. But the subconscious mind is there largely to protect the conscious mind from things which it would find traumatic or things it would find unpalatable. That's how trauma-based mind control works. Mm-hmm. You know, in the subconscious mind, you have all these different personalities that they've discovered they can create, because the mind is creating all these different personas to protect the conscious mind from having to deal with the trauma. That's how they can control all these artists.
Right.
And once you have all this explained to you, it doesn't have the same effect again. So when you see all these symbols in videos, you see these goddamn pyramids everywhere and all-seeing eyes and upside-down crosses and pentagrams and all these other things. They're all aimed at the subconscious mind. When you have a stage illusionist or a magician and they're doing these seemingly impossible tricks, they're making a tiger appear from nowhere in a cage. It wasn't there a minute ago, now it's here. You know, they're making a rabbit appear out of a hat. People can watch these stage shows and think, how the hell did he do that? Because he seems to have just conjured it out of nowhere. But every now and again, you get one of these illusionists and they actually explain how they do their tricks. Darren Brown here in the UK has done a lot of that on his Channel 4 TV shows. Right. He's done programs where he's broken down how he achieves certain tricks. He doesn't tell you how he does all his stuff, but the occasional one, he will say, here's how I did it. When you have it explained to you and you realize it was all illusion and sleight of hand, the next time you see that trick performed, you're not going to fall for it again. You're going to realize it's not magic. The guy's been very clever about how he's done it. And it's the same thing with all this symbolism and all these things that they put into videos and into music and stuff. When you have it explained to you, it's not going to have that same effect. So it's a case of getting it out of the subconscious mind, getting it into the conscious mind where it can be analyzed and understood, and just getting this information out to people. And you might have to let a few things go. That's the truth of it. It is what it is. I had to come to a begrudging understanding of the fact that Jay-Z was very much a manipulated puppet of the corporate industry and the dark occult forces that control it. This was a very difficult process for me. I've been a hip-hop fan for many years. When Jay-Z first came out, I thought he was fantastic. I was blown away by his lyrical skills. And a few years ago, you would have found me supporting him big time and defending him as the greatest rapper out there. When I came across all this information to explain just how he's being used, it was very hard for me to come to terms with. Mm-hmm. But it is what it is. Truth is truth. This is why original generation Beatles fans find it so difficult to acknowledge that there was any kind of hidden hand involved in the creation of the Beatles and throughout their whole career. There's a very strong suggestion that they were the product of the Tavistock Institute in London, which is linked to the Frankfurt School and various other think tanks that are all to do with social engineering and mass mind control. But you try suggesting that to somebody that grew up with the Beatles and they will defend you to the last. They're not having it. They will get aggressive with you. Right. They will not listen. They will argue with you all day that is not the case. Denial is very strong. You might have to let some of these things go. You know, when you come to these understandings, if you want to take responsibility for what's going on and the part that you play in it, if you come to understand that things are not going to change for humanity, and those of us that have kids need to think about the type of world that our children are going to have to live in, and their children. And we need to think about the part that we can play in helping to shape which way that's going to go. And if that involves you maybe having to let go of some artists that you've really enjoyed, maybe not support and buy certain types of music anymore that you've previously enjoyed, maybe not go to some shows or some festivals anymore that you previously enjoyed because you now understand what these festivals are being used for, you might have to do that. It's a question of how much you want it, how much you want things to change and how much you're prepared to take responsibility. I know it's difficult, but it's down to each individual to make their own free will choice as to whether they're going to take on board this knowledge and this wisdom and apply it in their lives, or whether they're just going to go for more of the same.
That's right. And
what's it going to be?
Remember, the height of ignorance is to admonish something without consideration. And so look at it for what it is, man. Don't just believe me or don't believe Mark. Do your own research. And speaking of which, man, how can people find you?
Well, the main portal for all of my work is basically markdevlin.co.uk, my main site. There's links from there to the rest of my work. My SoundCloud page has basically all my audio archives. There's 2 podcast series on there going way back. One of them is called Good Vibrations, which is a conversation-based podcast series. Quite similar to this. I've had a whole bunch of guests on there. I'm up to 70 volumes. I've had everyone from Mark Passio to David Icke to Fritz Springmeier, Freeman, Lennon Honor, Jay Widener, Janice Barcelo, Sonia Barrett, whole bunch of people I can't even think of at the moment.
Fantastic.
Santos Bonacci, Max Egan, everyone else. You can get all of those on my SoundCloud page. Also, I've got a conscious music podcast called The Sound of Freedom. So every fortnight, I bring together a bunch of music, old and new, where the lyrics really articulate the stuff that people are talking about and thinking about in these times. It's truth, it's conspiracy, it's spirituality, it's human freedom. It's mainly hip-hop. It's conscious hip-hop music that's still being made. And it reminds people that when you dig beneath the surface and you get past all these corporate puppeteered artists like Jay-Z and Kanye West and all these names, there is still real authentic music being made by artists that are outside of that controlled system and are doing things independently and expressing themselves creatively and intelligently. And I think my podcast is pretty much the only outlet for all that music that you can get every fortnight. I've not found any other conduit for all this stuff at all. I think it's pretty unique in that regard. And I go back to previous decades with it as well, with this feature called The Truth Trip. And it's music from the 60s, 70s, 80s of different types, rock music and pop and all sorts, reggae, that deal with the same type of subject matter. So The Sound of Freedom, the archives for all of that are on my SoundCloud page as well. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/MarkDevlinTV, and there's a whole bunch of my public talks up there. There's the talk that I did at the Glastonbury Symposium in the UK last year. There's one going up very shortly from the Open Mind Conference in Copenhagen, which I was at last weekend, which was fantastic. Wonderful gathering. Very similar to Free Your Mind in Philadelphia of this year. I'm waiting for the footage of that to go up as well on YouTube.
On YouTube. I know that they just put it up on the site and they just released all the rest of it, but it's still has
exactly. But when that goes on YouTube, I'll be putting that video up on my channel as well.
Great.
So markdevlin.co.uk is the first port of call for all of that. And if anyone wants to get in touch, the email address is on there. I always enjoy corresponding with people as long as it's polite. If people are just going to be obstructive and argue, and I'm not interested in that bullshit. But if people want to make constructive comments and reach out to me and link with me, I will always answer those messages.
And when is the book, and what is the name of the book, and when is it going to be coming out?
Well, the book is called Musical Truth. I'm looking to get the writing finished hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I have very little left to write, but it's quite frustrating. I'm just not getting the time to polish it off. I've got to finish writing it, then go over and proofread the 200,000 words, get a cover design done, and then look into getting it published. I'm aiming to get it out there by March. That's the target, because I'm coming to the Free Your Mind conference again in April next year in Philadelphia, Langhorne, and I want to have finished copies of the book with me on a merchandise table at that conference so people can buy copies then. So March is the target for that. I think I should achieve that.
Well, good luck to you, my friend, and look forward to having you on again, and also look forward to seeing you in Philadelphia. I have my tickets as well, and please bring me a book. I'd like to
for sure
to reserve that for me, and thanks again for your time today, Mark. Enjoyed having you. And
not a problem.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Free Your Mind Podcast, number 67. We love you, and we'll speak soon. Bye, everybody.